In the fog-shrouded spring of 1883, a terrified young woman seeks Sherlock Holmes' aid, haunted by her sister's mysterious death and a chilling phrase, the Speckled Band. As Holmes and Dr. Watson venture to the decaying manor of Stoke Moran, they uncover a diabolical plot woven by the sinister Dr. Grimsby Roylott, a deadly swamp adder, trained to kill through a cunning trap of a bolted bed, a dummy bell rope, and a secret ventilator, threatens to claim another victim. In a heart-pounding night vigil, Holmes unravels the truth, but will he outwit the venomous scheme before it strikes again? Chapter 1. A visitor in distressing the spring of 1883. During one of those crisp April mornings when the air of London carries a faint promise of renewal despite its perennial veil of fog, I, Dr. John H. Watson, found myself stirred from the comfortable haze of slumber by an insistent knocking at the door of our Baker Street lodgings. The clock upon the mantelpiece, its hands barely legible in the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains, marked the hour as 7:30, a time so unusual for visitors that it roused in me a sense of immediate disquiet. My friend and companion, Sherlock Holmes, was already awake, his lean silhouette framed against the window as he gazed down into the street below, where the early bustle of hansoms and costermongers was just beginning to animate the city. Holmes turned. As I entered the sitting room, his sharp features illuminated by a sliver of grey light. His eyes, ever keen and restless, held that peculiar glint which I had come to recognize as the harbinger of a new intellectual challenge. "Watson," said he, his voice low but vibrant with anticipation, "we have a client, and I wager it is no ordinary matter that brings them to our door at such an hour." Before I could respond, the knock sounded again, more urgent now, and Mrs. Hudson, our long-suffering landlady, appeared to announce the arrival of a young lady, her face pale and drawn with evident distress. The visitor was ushered in, and I beheld a woman of perhaps 30 years, though her countenance bore the weight of a far greater burden than her age might suggest. She was clad in a simple yet elegant dress of dark grey, its hem slightly muddied from travel, and her hands, clasped tightly before her, trembled as she stood in the doorway. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted nervously about the room before settling upon Holmes, who had risen to greet her with that courteous reserve which he reserved for those in genuine need. "Pray, take a seat, madam," said he, indicating the armchair by the fire. "You have nothing to fear here. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. Now, tell us what brings you to us in such evident agitation." The lady sank into the chair, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "My name is Helen Stoner," she began, her voice low and faltering, "and I come from Stoke Moran, in Surrey. I am in the gravest peril, Mr. Holmes, and I know not where else to turn. My life, my very life hangs in the balance, and I fear that without your aid, I shall meet the same fate as my poor sister." At this, her composure broke, and she buried her face in her hands, a sob escaping her lips. Holmes leaned forward, his expression softening, though his eyes remained piercing. "Compose yourself, Miss Stoner," said he gently. "You have done wisely to seek me out. Pray, tell us everything, omitting no detail, however trivial it may seem. The smallest point may prove of the utmost importance." Miss Stoner drew a shuddering breath and began her tale, which, even in its opening, carried a weight of dread that held me spellbound. She was the last surviving daughter of a once proud family, now reduced to herself and her stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott. a man whose name was spoken in Surrey with a mixture of awe and fear. The Roylotts had been one of the wealthiest families in the county, their estate at Stoke Moran, a grand relic of better days. But years of mismanagement and Roylott's own tempestuous nature had left it a crumbling shadow of its former glory. Helen and her twin sister, Julia, had lived under his care since their mother's death some 8 years prior, a period marked by increasing isolation and unease. My stepfather is a man of violent passions, Miss Stoner continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. He was once a respected physician, trained in Calcutta, where he married my mother, a widow with a considerable fortune. But his temper, always fierce, grew uncontrollable in India. There was an incident, a terrible one, in which he struck a native servant, and the man died. Dr. Roylott was imprisoned, though his sentence was commuted, and upon his return to England, he brought us to Stoke Moran. There, his behaviour grew stranger still. He keeps exotic animals, a cheetah and a baboon which roam the grounds, terrifying the villagers. The house itself is a place of gloom, its walls damp and its corridors echoing with the weight of neglect. I glanced at Holmes, expecting some reaction to this extraordinary detail, but he merely nodded, his fingers steepled before him, his mind evidently racing ahead to the implications of her words. "Go on," he urged. "Tell us of your sister, and of the events that have brought you here." Miss Stoner's eyes filled with tears, and she clasped her hands more tightly, as if to steady herself. Julia was my twin, my closest companion, and her death 2 years ago was a blow from which I have never recovered. She was to be married to a major in the army, a kind and honourable man, and her happiness seemed assured. But 2 weeks before the wedding, she began to speak of strange things, sounds in the night, a low whistle that seemed to come from nowhere. She dismissed it as nerves, or perhaps the wind in the old house, but I could see that it troubled her deeply. Then, one night, I was awakened by a scream, her scream. I rushed to her room, which adjoined mine, and found her standing in the doorway, her face white as death, her body convulsing. She gasped out words I shall never forget. "Oh, Helen, the speckled band." And then she fell, lifeless, into my arms. Holmes' eyes narrowed, and I saw a flicker of excitement cross his face, though he masked it with a sympathetic nod. "Was there no mark upon her? No sign of violence?" he asked. "None," Miss Stoner replied, her voice trembling. "The doctor was summoned, and the coroner's inquest followed, but they could find no cause of death. Her heart, they said, might have failed from fright or some unknown ailment. But I know it was no natural death, Mr. Holmes. Julia was strong, vibrant, she had no weakness of the heart. And now, I fear the same fate awaits me." Holmes leaned back, his gaze fixed upon her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through to the very core of her fear. "What has changed, Miss Stoner, to bring you here today?" he asked. "What new circumstance has revived this dread?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "I, too, am engaged to be married," she said at last. "My fiancé is a gentleman from Harrow, and we are to wed within the month. 3 nights ago, Dr. Roylott insisted that I move into Julia's old room, saying that repairs were needed in mine. The first night, I heard the same low whistle that Julia had described. It came at the 3rd hour after midnight, faint but unmistakable, and it has sounded each night since. I cannot sleep, Mr. Holmes. I feel his presence, his malice, all around me. I am certain he means to kill me, as he killed Julia, though I know not how or why." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant clatter of a passing cab. I felt a chill, not from the morning air, but from the palpable terror in Miss Stoner's voice. Holmes, however, remained impassive, his mind already at work upon the problem. "This whistle," said he, "describe it precisely. Was it continuous, or did it come in bursts? And from whence did it seem to originate?" "It was low and clear, like the sound of steam escaping a kettle," she replied. "It lasted perhaps 10 seconds, then ceased, only to resume a minute later. As for its source, I could not tell. The walls of Stoke Moran are thick, and the sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I thought perhaps it was the wind, or some trick of the old house, but my heart tells me otherwise." Holmes nodded, his expression inscrutable. "And your stepfather, has he given any indication of his intentions? Has he spoken of your marriage, or of your sister's death?" "He speaks little to me," said Miss Stoner. "He's a man of few words, save when his temper overtakes him. But I have seen his eyes upon me, cold and calculating, and I know he resents my engagement. My mother's will left her fortune in his control until Julia and I should marry, at which point we were to receive a portion of the income. Julia's death ensured that he retained her share, and I fear he means to secure mine as well." Holmes' lips tightened, and I saw in his face that rare blend of indignation and resolve that marked his response to cruelty and injustice. "You have done well to come to me," said he. "This is a matter of the utmost gravity, and we must act with all haste. Tell me, is your stepfather at home today?" "He is in London on business," she replied. "He left early this morning and will not return until evening. I took the first train to reach you, knowing this might be my only chance." "Excellent," said Holmes, rising with sudden energy. "Watson, we shall take the next train to Leatherhead and proceed to Stoke Moran. Miss Stoner, you must return to the manor and ensure that no suspicion is aroused. Can you arrange for us to examine the house in your stepfather's absence?" "Yes," she said, her voice steadier now, as if Holmes' decisiveness had bolstered her courage. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Armitage, is loyal to me. She will admit you through the side entrance. I shall await you at the Crown Inn, a mile from the estate, where I can remain unseen." "Very good," said Holmes. "We shall arrive by noon. One final question. Have you noticed anything unusual in Julia's room, or in the house, since you moved there? Any alteration, however slight?" Miss Stoner frowned, her brow furrowing as she searched her memory. "There is one thing," she said slowly. "The bed in Julia's room is fixed to the floor. I thought it odd, for it cannot be moved, even slightly, and there is a bell above it, which I assumed was for summoning the servants, but it does not seem to work. I pulled it once, and no one came." Holmes' eyes gleamed with a sudden intensity. "A fixed bed and a dummy bell rope," he murmured, almost to himself. "Most curious. Miss Stoner, you have given us much to consider. Return now to Stoke Moran, and we shall follow shortly." As she rose to leave, her face still pale but her step firmer, I could not help but admire her resilience in the face of such terror. Holmes escorted her to the door, his manner reassuring, and as Mrs. Hudson showed her out, he turned to me, his expression alive with purpose. "Watson, this is no ordinary case," said he. "There is a darkness here, a cunning mind at work. We must tread carefully, for Dr. Roylott is no common adversary." I nodded, my mind still reeling from the strangeness of Miss Stoner's tale. "What do you make of this speckled band?" I asked. "Could it be some delusion, born of fear. Holmes shook his head. Fear may sharpen the senses, but it does not conjure words so specific. The speckled band is a clue, Watson, though its meaning eludes me for the moment. The whistle, the fixed bed, the bell rope, these are pieces of a puzzle, and I mean to fit them together. Come, we have little time to lose. With that, he seized his hat and coat, and I followed, my heart quickening at the prospect of the adventure ahead. The streets of London were now fully awake, the cries of newsboys and the clatter of hooves filling the air as we made our way to Waterloo Station. The train to Leatherhead was swift, and as the city gave way to the green expanse of Surrey, I found myself reflecting on the singular nature of the case. Holmes, as was his wont, sat in silence, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his mind no doubt racing through 100 possibilities. Upon reaching Leatherhead, we hired a trap and set out for Stoke Moran, the driver regaling us with tales of Dr. Roylott's fearsome reputation. "A devil of a man," said he, shaking his head. "They say he keeps wild beasts, and none dare go near the place after dark." I glanced at Holmes, but he merely smiled, his thoughts elsewhere. The estate, when we reached it, was a study in decay. The manor house loomed against the sky, its grey stone walls streaked with moss, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The grounds were overgrown, and as we approached, a sudden roar from the cheetah sent a shiver through me. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his attention fixed on the house itself. "Observe, Watson," said he, pointing to the heavy iron shutters that covered the lower windows. "Recently repaired, and quite out of keeping with the rest of the neglect. There is purpose here, though what it may be, I cannot yet say." We were met at the side entrance by Mrs. Armitage, a gaunt woman whose nervous glances betrayed her fear of her master. She led us to Julia's room, which was to be Helen's for the time being, and Holmes set to work with his characteristic thoroughness. The room was sparsely furnished, its walls damp and stained, but it was the bed that drew his attention first. As Miss Stoner had described, it was bolted to the floor, immovable despite his efforts. Above it hung the bell rope, which, upon inspection, proved to be a mere ornament, connected to nothing. Holmes' brow furrowed as he examined the wall, his fingers tracing a small, circular ventilator high above the bed. Its purpose unclear in a room so ill-ventilated otherwise. "Most singular," he murmured. "This ventilator is too large for mere air, and its position is curious. Watson, what do you make of it?" I confessed myself baffled. "It seems impractical," said I. "The room is cold, and yet the ventilator connects to the adjoining chamber, which can offer no fresh air." "Precisely," said Holmes, his voice tinged with excitement. "It is not air that this device is meant to convey. But what then? That is the question." Our examination was cut short by the sound of a carriage on the drive, and Mrs. Armitage's face blanched. "The master," she whispered. "He was not to return so soon." Holmes' eyes hardened. "We must not be seen," said he. "Quickly, Watson, to the inn. We shall return tonight, under cover of darkness." We slipped out through the side entrance, making our way to the Crown Inn, where Miss Stoner awaited us. There, Holmes outlined his plan. We would keep vigil in Julia's room that night, watching for the mysterious whistle and whatever might follow. Miss Stoner, pale but resolute, agreed to signal us when Roylott retired. As we parted, I could not shake the sense of foreboding that hung over us, nor the conviction that we were on the brink of uncovering a horror unlike any we had faced before. The Day passed in a haze of anticipation, and as evening fell, Holmes and I prepared for the night ahead. He armed himself with a stout cane, while I slipped my revolver into my pocket, its weight a reassuring presence. The journey back to Stoke Moran was made in silence, the darkness of the countryside broken only by the occasional glimmer of a distant light. At the inn, Miss Stoner confirmed that Roylott had retired, and we made our way to the manor, our steps muffled by the damp grass. The house was silent as we entered, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. We took up our post in Julia's room, extinguishing our lamp to avoid detection. The darkness was oppressive, the silence broken only by the faint creak of the old house and the distant cry of the cheetah. Holmes sat motionless, his hand upon my arm, his senses attuned to the slightest sound. I, too, strained to hear, my heart pounding in the stillness. Hours passed, each minute stretching into eternity. Then, at last, a faint light appeared in Roylott's window, signaling his retirement. Holmes' grip tightened, and we waited, the tension mounting with each passing second. It was then that I heard Italo's clear whistle, faint but unmistakable. Rising from the darkness like a spectre, Holmes' eyes gleamed in the gloom. "The game is afoot, Watson," he whispered. "Be ready, for we are about to face the heart of this mystery." Thus ended the first stage of our adventure, a prelude to the strange and terrible events that would unfold in the hours to come. As I sat in that darkened room, my friend's presence a steady anchor amidst the unknown, I could not have foreseen the full horror of what lay ahead, nor the ingenuity of the mind that had set it in motion. But of that I shall speak in its proper place. Chapter 2. The Sinister Stepfather. As the morning fog of that April day in 1883 began to lift from the streets of London, Sherlock Holmes and I sat in our Baker Street rooms, the weight of Miss Helen Stoner's narrative still heavy upon us. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. But Holmes' attention was fixed inward, his sharp eyes half closed as he sifted through the details of her tale. I, too, found my thoughts returning to the image of Stoke Moran, that decaying manor in Surrey, and the menacing figure of Dr. Grimesby Roylott, whose shadow loomed over Miss Stoner's every word. The urgency of her plea, coupled with the mystery of her sister's death, had ignited in Holmes that restless energy which I knew presaged a case of singular complexity. Holmes broke the silence at last, rising abruptly to pace the room, his dressing gown trailing behind him like a cloak. "Watson," said he, "this affair is no mere domestic squabble. The elements are too strange, too precise, to be dismissed as coincidence. The whistle, the speckled band, the fixed bed, these are not the trappings of a simple crime, but of a mind both cunning and malevolent. We must learn more of this Dr. Roylott, for he is the pivot upon which this mystery turns." I nodded, my mind still grappling with the horror of Miss Stoner's account. "The man sounds formidable," I remarked. "A physician with a violent past, keeping wild beasts on his estate. It is as though he has created a fortress of fear." "Precisely," said Holmes, pausing by the window to gaze out at the bustling street below. "Fear is a weapon, Watson, and Roylott wields it with intent. But fear also betrays purpose, and purpose leaves traces. We shall uncover those traces, but first, let us consider the man himself. Miss Stoner's description suggests a character of unusual depth and danger. I must know more of his history before we proceed to Stoke Moran." Holmes crossed to the bookshelf, pulling down a well-worn volume of the medical directory, its pages dog-eared from frequent use. He flipped through it with practiced ease, his long fingers pausing at an entry. "Here we are," he murmured. "Grimsby Roylott, M.D., formerly of Calcutta, admitted to the Royal College of Surgeons in 1860, noted for his work in tropical diseases, but struck off the register in 1875 following a conviction for manslaughter. A most interesting career." "Manslaughter," I exclaimed, leaning forward. Miss Stoner mentioned an incident in India, but she gave no details. Holmes' lips curved into a grim smile. "The details are here, in the public record, and I have supplemented them with inquiries made some years ago when Roylott's name crossed my path in another matter. He was a man of considerable promise in his youth, descended from one of the oldest families in Surrey, the Roylotts of Stoke. Moran, his medical practice in Calcutta was lucrative, catering to the colonial elite, and his marriage to Mrs. Stoner, a wealthy widow, secured him a fortune. But his temper, always volatile, erupted in a tragic altercation. A native servant, accused of theft, was beaten so severely by Roylott that the man succumbed to his injuries. The trial was a sensation in Calcutta, and though Roylott's wealth and connections spared him a harsher sentence, he served 3 years in prison before returning to England. I shuddered at the thought of such a man holding sway over two defenseless women, and yet he was permitted to take charge of Miss Stoner and her sister. I asked. Holmes nodded, closing the book with a snap. The mothers will entrusted him with the care of her daughters and the management of her estate until they should marry or come of age. A dangerous arrangement, given his character. The Roylott fortune, as Miss Stoner indicated, was tied to the mother's income, which was to be divided equally among the daughters upon their marriage. Julia's death preserved Roylott's control over her share, and now Helen's engagement threatens to diminish it further. Greed, Watson, is a powerful motive, and I suspect it lies at the heart of this affair. But the method, I said, frowning. Julia's death left no mark, no trace of violence. How could such a thing be accomplished? That, said Holmes, is the question that intrigues me most. The speckled band, the whistle, the peculiarities of the room, these are not the tools of a blunt murderer, but of one who plans with precision. Roylott's medical knowledge, particularly his familiarity with tropical diseases, may hold the key. In India, he would have encountered poisons and methods unknown to most English physicians. We must be on our guard, for such a man does not act rashly. Holmes' words were interrupted by a sharp rap at the door, and Mrs. Hudson entered, her face pale and her hands clutching a telegram. "This just arrived, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling. "The boy said it was urgent." Holmes tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the message with lightning speed. His expression darkened, and he handed the paper to me. It read, "Return immediate. Roylott in London. Danger, H.S. Miss Stoner," I said, my heart sinking. She must have learned of his presence after she left us. Holmes nodded, his jaw set. "This complicates matters, but it also confirms our suspicions. Roylott is no idle threat. We must act swiftly, Watson, but with caution. We shall take the 11 o'clock train to Leatherhead and proceed to the Crown Inn, where Miss Stoner awaits us. There we can plan our next move." We prepared at once, Holmes donning his ulster and I securing my coat and hat, my revolver a familiar weight in my pocket. The journey to Waterloo Station was swift, the streets of London alive with the clamour of midday. As we boarded the train, Holmes sat in silence, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, his mind no doubt racing through the intricacies of the case. I, too, was lost in thought, pondering the strange details of Miss Stoner's story, the cheetah and baboon, the whistle in the night, the inexplicable death of Julia Stoner. These were not the elements of a common crime, but of something far more sinister. At Leatherhead, we found a trap waiting. Its driver, a taciturn man, who eyed us with curiosity but asked no questions. The road to Stoke Moran wound through the rolling Surrey countryside, the fields bright with spring green, but as we neared the estate, the landscape grew bleak, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The manor itself came into view, a sprawling mass of grey stone, its towers sagging under the weight of years, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. The grounds were overgrown, the once manicured lawns now a tangle of weeds, and as we approached, a sudden flash of movement caught my azure lithe, tawny shape darting through the undergrowth. "The cheetah," I said, my hand straying to my revolver. Holmes' gaze followed the creature, his expression unperturbed. "A curious choice of pet," he remarked. "It serves to keep intruders at bay, no doubt, and to heighten the atmosphere of fear. Roylott is a man who understands the power of intimidation." We alighted at the Crown Inn, a modest establishment, a mile from the estate, where Miss Stoner awaited us in a private parlour. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with alarm. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, rising as we entered. "I am so thankful you have come. Dr. Roylott returned unexpectedly this morning, just after I sent the telegram. He was in a rage, demanding to know where I had been. I fear he suspects. I have sought help." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Did he speak of us, or of your intentions?" he asked. "No," she replied, but his manner was threatening. He locked himself in his study, and I heard him pacing, muttering to himself. "Slipped away to send the telegram and have remained here since." "You have acted with great presence of mind," said Holmes. "Now, tell me, has anything further occurred since we spoke this morning? Any sound, any observation, however small?" Miss Stoner hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her shawl. "There is one thing," she said at last. "Last night, after the whistle, I thought I heard another sound, a faint, scraping noise, like something moving across the floor. It came from the direction of the ventilator, but when I lit my candle, there was nothing to be seen." Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. "A scraping noise," he repeated, "and you are certain it came from the ventilator?" "I believe so," she said. "The room was dark, and the sound was faint, but it was distinct from the whistle. I have not dared to sleep there since." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, his eyes alight with that fierce curiosity that I knew so well. "This is most significant," said he. "Miss Stoner, you must remain here at the inn until we send for you. Watson and I will visit the manor this afternoon, while Roylott is occupied. We must examine the room and its surroundings without delay." She nodded, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "I trust you, Mr. Holmes," she said, "but please be careful. My stepfather is a dangerous man, and I fear what he might do if he discovers your presence." "We shall be discretion itself," Holmes assured her. "Now, rest here and keep the door locked. We shall return before nightfall." We left the inn and made our way to Stoke Moran on foot, approaching the manor from a wooded path to avoid detection. The estate was even more forbidding up close, its walls streaked with damp, its chimneys crumbling. Holmes' eyes scanned every detail, noting the heavy iron gates, the boarded-up windows, and the faint tracks of the cheetah in the muddy earth. "A fortress indeed," he murmured. But every fortress has its weaknesses. Mrs. Armitage, the housekeeper, met us at the side entrance, her face drawn with anxiety. "The master is in his study," she whispered. "He has not left it since his return, but he is in a black mood. You must be quick." She led us through a maze of dim corridors, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. To the room that had been Julia's and was now Helen's. It was a cheerless chamber, its walls bare save for a few faded portraits, its furniture sparse and worn. The bed, as Miss Stoner had described, was bolted to the floor, its position fixed beneath a small, circular ventilator high in the wall. Above it hung the bell rope, its frayed end dangling uselessly. Holmes examined each in turn, his movements swift and precise, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light. "The bed is immovable," he said, tugging at its frame. "A curious feature, and not one I have encountered in a bedroom before. And this bell rope, observe, Watson. It is not connected to any wire or mechanism. It is a mere prop designed to deceive." He turned his attention to the ventilator, standing on a chair to peer into its dark recess. "This is no ordinary aperture," he said, his voice low. "It is too wide, too deliberate, for its stated purpose. And see here, the wall on the other side leads to Roylett's chamber. There is more here than meets the eye." I felt a growing unease, the silence of the room oppressive. What could such a device be for? I asked. Holmes did not answer at once, his gaze fixed on the ventilator as if it held the answer to the entire mystery. At last, he stepped down, his expression grave. "I have a hypothesis, Watson, but it is too early to voice it. We must gather more data, and tonight will be the time to test it. For now, we have seen enough. Let us return to the inn and prepare for what lies ahead." We slipped out of the manor as silently as we had entered, the housekeeper's anxious whispers urging us to haste. As we made our way back to the Crown Inn, the sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the fields. Holmes was silent, his mind absorbed in the problem, but I could sense the tension in him, the coiled energy of a hunter closing in on his quarry. At the inn, we found Miss Stoner waiting, her face a mask of apprehension. Holmes reassured her, with a few calm words, outlining our plan to keep vigil in her room that night. "We shall enter after Dr. Roylett has retired," he said. "You must signal us with a lamp from your window when it is safe. Until then, remain here and speak to no one," she agreed, her courage bolstered by Holmes' unwavering confidence. As we settled in to wait, the hours stretching before us, I could not shake the sense that we were on the brink of a confrontation with a force as cunning as it was ruthless. The sinister stepfather, with his violent past and his strange menagerie, was a figure of almost Gothic terror, and I knew that the night ahead would test our resolve as few cases had before. But with Holmes at my side, his intellect a beacon in the darkness, I felt ready to face whatever horrors awaited us at Stoke Moran. Chapter 3. The Journey to Stoke Moran. The morning of our departure for Stoke Moran, in that fateful April of 1883, found Sherlock Holmes and me hastening through the bustling thoroughfares of London. The urgency of Miss Helen Stoner's plight lending a sharp edge to our purpose. The air was crisp, the sky a pale grey streaked with the smoke of countless chimneys, and the streets thronged with the ceaseless tide of humanity, cabbies shouting, vendors hawking their wares, and the clatter of hooves mingling with the cries of newsboys. Yet Holmes, striding beside me with his long, purposeful gait, seemed oblivious to the clamour, his mind wholly absorbed in the enigma we were about to confront. I, too, felt the weight of the case. The strange details of Miss Stoner's narrative, the low whistle, the speckled band, the sinister figure of Dr. Grimsby, roilet stirring, a restless anticipation within me. We reached Waterloo Station with minutes to spare, securing a first-class compartment on the 11 o'clock train to Leatherhead. As the train pulled away from the platform, its whistle shrieking through the morning air, Holmes leaned back in his seat, his sharp features softened by the diffused light filtering through the window. "Watson," said he, breaking the silence, "this case is one of those rare puzzles that demand both caution and audacity. Roylott is no ordinary adversary. His intellect, warped though it may be by cruelty, is formidable, and his resources are unusual. We must be prepared for anything." I nodded, my thoughts drifting to the telegram Miss Stoner had sent, warning of Roylott's unexpected return to London. "Do you think he suspects her visit to us?" I asked, my hand resting lightly on the reassuring bulk of my revolver in my coat pocket. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity that marked his deepest engagement. "It is possible," he replied. "His sudden return suggests either suspicion or some other pressing motive. But suspicion alone does not explain the whistle, nor the death of Julius Stoner. There is a mechanism at work here, Watson, a design, as precise as it is malevolent. Our task is to uncover its workings before it claims another victim." The journey to Leatherhead passed swiftly, the urban sprawl giving way to the rolling green of the Surrey countryside. The fields, dotted with grazing sheep and the occasional copse of budding trees, offered a stark contrast to the grim purpose of our errand. At Leatherhead, we alighted and secured a trap, driven by a weathered old man who regarded us with a mixture of curiosity and reserve. "To Stoke Moran, is it?" he asked, his voice roughened by years of pipe smoke. "Not many." "Go that way, sirs. Dr. Roylott ain't one for visitors." Holmes smiled thinly. "We have business there," said he, offering no further explanation. The driver shrugged, cracking his whip, and the trap lurched forward, the wheels rattling over the uneven road. As we wound through the lanes, the driver, perhaps sensing our reticence, ventured a few remarks about the estate. "Queer place, Stoke Moran," he said, squinting at the horizon. "Used to be grand, in the old days, but now it's all gone to ruin. And those beasts that cheater and that ape folks say they're more like demons than animals." I glanced at Holmes, expecting some quip to lighten the mood, but he merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. "Have you seen these creatures yourself?" he asked. "Aye," the driver replied, his tone wary. "The cheetah prowls the grounds at dusk, and I've heard its roar from the road. The baboons were skulks about like a ghost, screeching fit to wake the dead. No one goes near the place after dark, not if they value their skin." Holmes' lips twitched, but he said nothing more, and I felt a chill at the thought of the manner we were approaching. The driver's words painted a picture of a place steeped in foreboding, its isolation a perfect cloak for whatever dark deeds Roylott might be planning. As we crested a low hill, the estate came into view, and I caught my breath at the sight. Stoke Moran was a relic of faded grandeur, its grey stone walls rising like a fortress from the overgrown parkland that surrounded it. The manor's towers, once proud, now leaned at precarious angles, their battlements crumbling under the weight of neglect. The windows, many boarded or shuttered, gave the house a blind, unwelcoming aspect, and the grounds were a wilderness of tangled weeds and gnarled trees. A faint mist clung to the hollows, lending the scene an almost spectral quality, and as we drew closer, A guttural roar echoed from the undergrowth, sending a flock of roosters scattering skyward. "The cheetah," I said, my voice low, my hand tightening on my revolver. Holmes' eyes narrowed, but his tone was calm. "A theatrical touch," he remarked. "Roylott uses fear as a barrier, keeping the curious at bay. But fear, Watson, is a veil, and we shall pierce it." The driver halted the trap a short distance from the manor, unwilling to venture closer. "I'll wait ere," he said, his eyes darting nervously toward the house. "Mind yourselves, sirs, that place ain't right." We descended and approached the estate on foot, keeping to the shadows of an overgrown hedgerow to avoid detection. Holmes' gaze swept over the manor, noting every detail: the heavy iron gates, rusted but recently repaired, the deep ruts in the drive, suggesting frequent use, and the faint glint of metal where new shutters had been fitted to the lower windows. "Observe, Watson," said he, pointing to the shutters. "They are sturdy, almost impregnable. Roylott has fortified this place, but for what purpose? Protection or concealment?" We reached the side entrance, where Mrs. Armitage, the housekeeper, awaited us, her thin frame trembling as she opened the door. "You're here," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the interior of the house. "The master's in his study, but he's been in a black temper all morning. You must be quick, sirs, and quiet." Holmes nodded, his manner reassuring yet authoritative. "Lead us to Miss Stoner's room," said he, "and then return to your duties. We shall manage from here." The housekeeper led us through a labyrinth of dim corridors, the air thick with the musty scent of damp stone and old wood. The manor's interior was as desolate as its exterior, the walls stained with damp, the floors creaking underfoot. Portraits of long-dead Roylotts stared down from the shadows, their eyes seeming to follow us as we passed. At last, we reached the chamber that had been Julia Stoner's and was now occupied by Helen, a room as cheerless as the rest of the house, its sparse furnishings dwarfed by the high, vaulted ceiling. Holmes wasted no time, his movements swift and methodical as he began his examination. The bed, as Miss Stoner had described, was bolted to the floor, its iron frame immovable despite his efforts to shift it. "Curious," he murmured, running his fingers along the bolts. "This is no ordinary fixture. It is as if the bed were meant to remain precisely here, beneath this point." He turned his attention to the bell rope, which hung from the ceiling above the bed, its frayed end dangling within reach. He tugged at it gently, then more firmly, but it yielded no response. "A dummy," he said, his voice low. "It serves no purpose save to deceive. But why place it here, in this exact spot?" His gaze shifted to the ventilator, a small, circular aperture high in the wall, its edges blackened with age. Standing on a chair, he peered into its depths, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the interior. "This is no ordinary ventilator," he said, his tone tinged with excitement. "It is too wide, too deliberate, and it connects directly to Roylott's chamber. There is intent here, Watson, a design I cannot yet fully grasp." I stood by, my mind racing to keep pace with his observations. "Could it be for surveillance?" I ventured. "To overhear conversations, perhaps?" Holmes shook his head, stepping down from the chair. "Not surveillance, I think. The aperture is too large for sound alone, and its position is impractical. For eavesdropping. No, this is meant to convey something else, something tangible, but what?" He moved to the window, testing the heavy iron shutters that barred it. They were newly fitted, their bolts gleaming in contrast to the rusted frame. "These shutters are a recent addition," he said. "Roylott has taken pains to secure this room, yet the ventilator remains an anomaly. It is a chink in his armor, and I mean to discover its purpose." Our inspection was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the depths of the house, a heavy tread, followed by the crash of a door. Mrs. Armitage's face appeared at the threshold, her eyes wide with panic. "He's coming," she hissed. "The master, he's left his study." Holmes' expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "We must not be seen," said he. "Mrs. Armitage, lead us out by the quickest route. Watson, stay close." We followed the housekeeper through a side passage, our footsteps muffled by the thick dust underfoot. As we reached the outer door, a roar of fury echoed from the corridor behind us, and I caught a glimpse of a towering figure, his face contorted with rage, striding toward the room we had just vacated. It was Dr. Roylott, his massive frame filling the doorway, his eyes blazing with suspicion. We slipped into the garden, crouching behind a tangle of briars, as Roylott's voice thundered through the open window. "Who has been here?" he bellowed, his words punctuated by the crash of furniture. "I'll have the truth, or by heaven, someone will suffer." Mrs. Armitage, trembling beside us, whispered, "He'll know I let you in. What shall I do?" "Say nothing," Holmes instructed, his voice low but firm. "Return to the house and act as though all is well. We shall contact you later." She nodded, her face pale, and slipped back toward the manor. Holmes and I retreated through the undergrowth, making our way to the wooded path that led to the Crown Inn. As we walked, the roar of the cheetah sounded again, a chilling reminder of the dangers that surrounded us. "Roylott is on edge," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "His reaction confirms that he fears discovery. We must be wary, Watson, for he is a man who will stop at nothing." At the inn, we found Miss Stoner in the same private parlor, her face drawn with anxiety. Holmes recounted our findings, his tone measured but urgent. "The room holds the key to this mystery," he said. "The bed, the bell rope, the ventilator, they are parts of a machine, though its purpose remains obscure. Tonight, we shall return to Stoke Moran and keep vigil in your room. You must signal us when Roylott retires, as we discussed." Miss Stoner nodded, her courage bolstered by Holmes' resolve. "I will do as you say," she said. "But please, Mr. Holmes, take care. My stepfather is a man of terrible strength and cunning. We shall be prepared," Holmes assured her. "Rest here and keep the door locked. We shall return before nightfall." As we left the inn to prepare for the evening's vigil, the sun was sinking low, casting a golden glow over the fields. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt piecing together the clues we had uncovered. I, too, felt the weight of the task ahead, the sense that we were closing in on a truth as deadly as it was elusive. The journey to Stoke Moran had revealed much, but the heart of the mystery, the speckled band, and its terrible purpose remained shrouded in shadow, waiting to be unveiled in the dark hours to come. Chapter 4. The Menacing Presence. The twilight shadows were lengthening across the Surrey countryside as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back from the Crown. In the events of our morning visit to Stoke Moran, still vivid in my mind. The decaying manor, with its air of desolation and the unsettling presence of Dr. Grimsby Roylott's exotic beasts, had left an impression of foreboding that clung to me like the damp mist of the evening. Holmes, striding beside me with his characteristic energy, seemed undeterred. his sharp eyes scanning the horizon as if the very landscape might yield further clues to the mystery we pursued. The encounter with Roylott's furious outburst, though brief, had confirmed the danger Miss Helen Stoner faced, and I felt the weight of our responsibility to her safety. We had barely settled in the private parlour of the inn, where Miss Stoner awaited us, when Holmes turned to me, his voice low and purposeful. "Watson," said he, "Roylott's reaction was no mere tantrum. It betrays a man who knows his plans are at risk. The ventilator, the fixed bed, the dummy bell rope, these are not random eccentricities, but parts of a deliberate scheme. We must be prepared for a confrontation tonight, for I suspect he will act soon." I nodded, my hands straying to the reassuring weight of my revolver. "The man is a brute," I said. "His violence in India, his treatment of Miss Stoner, it all points to a nature capable of anything. But what could he hope to gain by such elaborate means?" Holmes' eyes gleamed with that fierce intensity that marked his deepest engagement. "Greed, Watson, is a motive as old as mankind. The terms of Mrs. Stoner's will are clear. Roylott controls the fortune until his stepdaughters marry, at which point their shares are released. Julia's death secured her portion for him, and now Helen's engagement threatens the remainder. He cannot afford to lose control, and I fear he has devised a method both cunning and deadly to prevent it." Miss Stoner, seated by the fire, listened in silence, her pale face drawn with anxiety. "He has always been cold to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But since my engagement, his manner has grown darker. He watches me, Mr. Holmes, with a look that chills my blood. I am certain he knows I suspect him." Holmes leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "You have shown great courage, Miss Stoner, and you must trust us now. Tonight we shall keep watch in your room. If Roylott follows the pattern you described, we may catch him in the act. But you must remain here, safe from harm, until we summon you." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I will do as you say," she said, "but please, be careful. His strength is terrible, and his temper knows no bounds." Holmes offered a reassuring smile. "We are not unaccustomed to danger, Miss Stoner. Now, rest here, and signal us with the lamp as we agreed. Watson and I will prepare for the night ahead." We left her in the care of the innkeeper, a stout, kindly woman who promised to keep the parlour secure, and made our way to a nearby copse to await the fall of night. The air grew cooler, the sky deepening to a bruised purple as the stars began to emerge. Holmes, ever vigilant, reviewed the details of our plan, his voice a low murmur against the rustle of leaves. "We shall enter the manor through the side entrance," he said, "and take up our post in Miss Stoner's room. Keep your revolver ready, Watson, but use it only as a last resort. Our goal is to observe, not to provoke." I agreed, though the prospect of facing Roylott in the darkened corridors of Stoke Moran sent a shiver through me. The memory of his towering figure, his voice booming with rage, was fresh in my mind, and I knew we were dealing with a man whose capacity for violence was matched only by his cunning. As the clock in the village church struck 9, we set out, moving silently through the fields to avoid the main road. The manor loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonless sky, its windows dark save for a single glow from what I presumed was Roylott's study. The grounds were eerily silent, the cheetah and baboon mercifully absent, though their presence lingered in the faint tracks we glimpsed in the moonlight. We reached the side entrance, where Mrs. Armitage, true to her word, awaited us, her face pale in the dim light of a shielded lantern. "He's still in his study," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But he's been drinking, sirs, and his mood is foul. You must be quick." Holmes nodded, slipping a coin into her hand. "You have done well," he said. "Return to your quarters, and speak of this to no one." She vanished into the shadows, and we entered the manor, the door creaking softly as it closed behind us. The corridors were as oppressive as before, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and old wood. Holmes led the way, his steps sure despite the darkness, until we reached Miss Stoner's room. He closed the door behind us, and we stood for a moment, letting our eyes adjust to the gloom. The room was unchanged from our earlier visit. The bolted bed and dummy bell rope, stark reminders of the mystery we sought to unravel. Holmes moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "No signal yet," he murmured. "Roylott is still awake. We must wait, Watson, and remain silent. The slightest sound could betray us." We took up our positions, I by the door with my revolver at hand, Holmes near the ventilator, his keen senses attuned to any disturbance. The minutes stretched into hours, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. My nerves were taut, the darkness pressing in, but Holmes remained calm, his figure a shadowy outline against the wall. At last, a faint flicker of light appeared at Roylott's window, signaling his retirement. Holmes' hand closed briefly on my arm, a silent command to be ready. We waited, the tension mounting, until the light vanished, plunging the manor into darkness. "Now," Holmes whispered, "we watch." Scarcely had he spoken when the door to the room burst open, and a massive figure filled the threshold. It was Dr. Roylott, his face a mask of fury in the dim light of a lantern he carried. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, swept the room, and his voice, thick with drink, roared through the silence. "Who dares invade my house?" he bellowed, brandishing a heavy walking stick, its polished wood gleaming ominously. "Show yourselves, or I'll have you out like rats." I gripped my revolver, my heart pounding, but Holmes remained still, his voice low and steady as he stepped into the lantern's glow. "Dr. Roylott," said he, his tone calm but edged with steel, "we are here at the request of Miss Stoner, who fears for her life. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We mean you no harm, but we will have answers." Roylott's face contorted, his massive frame trembling with rage. "You meddling fool," he roared, raising the stick as if to strike. "You think to pry into my affairs. I'll teach you to interfere." I raised my revolver, but Holmes' hand shot out, restraining me. "Stay your hand, Watson," he said, his eyes never leaving Roylott's. "Dr. Roylott, your actions betray you. The ventilator, the bell rope, the death of Julius Stoner, these are no accidents. Speak, or we shall uncover the truth without your aid." For a moment, I thought Roylott would lunge, his bulk seeming to fill the room with menace. But something in Holmes' unflinching gaze seemed to check him, and his arm lowered, the stick hanging limp at his side. "You know nothing," he growled, his voice hoarse. "This is my house, my domain. Get out, or you'll regret it." Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes were cold. "We shall leave, for now," said he. "But know this, Roylott, we are watching, and your secrets will not remain hidden long." Roylott's face darkened, but he said no more, turning abruptly and stalking from the room, his lantern casting wild shadows on the walls. The door slammed behind him, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. That was close, I said, my voice unsteady. He's a dangerous man, Holmes. Indeed, said Holmes, his tone thoughtful. But his reaction confirms much. He is rattled, Watson, and a rattled man makes mistakes. We must return to the inn and regroup. Tonight's vigil is postponed, but we shall return tomorrow, and I wager we shall find the key to this mystery. We slipped out of the manor, the night air cool against my flushed face. As we made our way back to the Crown Inn, the distant roar of the cheetah echoed through the darkness, a reminder of the peril that surrounded us. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt turning over the encounter with Roylott, but I could sense the determination in him, the unyielding resolve that had seen us through so many dangers. The menacing presence of Dr. Roylott had been revealed in all its fury, but it had only strengthened Holmes' resolve to unravel the dark design at the heart of Stoke Moran. Chapter 5. A plan of action. The encounter with Dr. Grimsby Roylott in the darkened chamber of Stoke Moran had left an indelible mark upon my mind, and as Sherlock Holmes and I retraced our steps through the shadowed fields to the Crown Inn, the chill of the April night seemed to mirror the unease that gripped me. The towering figure of Roylott, his face contorted with rage, and his voice booming with threats, had revealed a man not only capable of violence, but driven by a desperate need to guard his secrets. Holmes, striding beside me with his usual purposeful gait, appeared unperturbed, his sharp features set in an expression of intense concentration. Yet I knew from long experience that beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle we had uncovered. We reached the Crown Inn just as the village clock struck 10, its solemn chime echoing across the quiet countryside. Miss Helen Stoner awaited us in the private parlour, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The sight of her, so fragile yet resolute in the face of such terror, stirred a renewed determination within me to see this matter through. Holmes, ever sensitive to the emotions of those in his charge, offered her a reassuring nod as we entered, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of our situation. "Miss Stoner," said he, settling into a chair by the fire, "we have met your stepfather, and his reaction confirms the danger you face. He is a man of formidable will and no small cunning, but his agitation suggests he fears discovery. We must act swiftly, yet with utmost caution, to unravel his design before it claims you as it did your sister." Miss Stoner's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You saw him? Did he suspect your purpose?" "He knows we are here at your behest," Holmes replied, his tone measured. His threats were fierce, but they betray a man on edge, one who senses the noose tightening. The ventilator, the fixed bed, the dummy bell rope, these are no mere quirks of architecture, but elements of a deliberate plan. Tonight, we must return to Stoke Moran and keep vigil in your room. If my suspicions are correct, we may catch the mechanism in action. I felt a surge of apprehension at the thought of returning to that grim manor, with Roylott's menacing presence so near. "Holmes," I said, "the man is dangerous, and we are on his ground. Should we not summon the authorities?" Holmes shook his head, his lips curving into a faint smile. "The law is a blunt instrument, Watson, and this case requires precision. We have no proof, only clues and suspicions. To call in the police now would alert Roylott and perhaps drive him to act with greater haste. No, we must observe the beast in its lair, and for that we need stealth and patience." Miss Stoner's voice broke the silence, her words barely above a whisper. "What do you believe he is planning, Mr. Holmes?" "The whistle, the speckled band, what do they mean?" Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled before him, his eyes half closed as he considered her question. "The speckled band is the key," said he, "though its nature remains elusive. The whistle, I suspect, is a signal, perhaps to initiate or control some agency we have yet to identify. The ventilator and bell rope suggest a means of delivery, a way to introduce something into your room without leaving a trace. Roylett's medical knowledge, honed in India, points to a method both subtle and deadly perhaps, a poison or some creature trained to his will. But these are hypotheses, Miss Stoner. Tonight we shall seek facts." I marveled at the clarity of his reasoning, though the thought of a trained creature sent a chill through me. "A creature," I said. "Surely not one of his beasts, the cheetah or baboon." Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity that marked his deepest engagement. "Unlikely," he said. "A cheetah or baboon would leave marks, and Julia's death was clean, without violence. No, Watson, we are dealing with something smaller, more insidious. The ventilator's size and position suggest a passage for something living, yet compact. But enough speculation. We must prepare for the night ahead." He turned to Miss Stoner, his tone brisk but kind. "You will remain here under the innkeeper's protection. When Dr. Roylett retires, you must signal us with a lamp from your window, as we discussed. Watson and I will enter the manor and take up our post in your room. Should anything occur, we will act to ensure your safety." Miss Stoner nodded, her courage bolstered by Holmes' resolve. "I trust you, Mr. Holmes," she said, "but please take every precaution. My stepfather is not a man to be trifled with." "We shall be prepared," Holmes assured her. "Now, rest here and keep the door locked. We will return before midnight." We left the parlor and stepped into the cool night air, the stars now bright above the quiet village. Holmes led me to a small shed behind the inn, where we could speak without fear of being overheard. There, in the dim light of a single candle, he outlined our plan with the precision of a general preparing for battle. "We shall approach the manor from the west," said he, "through the copse that borders the estate. The side entrance, thanks to Mrs. Armitage, will be our point of entry. Once inside, we will move silently to Miss Stoner's room and extinguish all lights. You will station yourself by the door, Watson, with your revolver at the ready. I will take position near the ventilator, where I can observe any movement. We must remain absolutely still, for the slightest sound could betray us." I nodded, my heart quickening at the thought of the vigil ahead. "And if Roylett appears?" I asked. Holmes' expression hardened. "If he enters, we will confront him, but only if necessary. Our goal is to uncover his method, not to provoke a brawl. Your revolver is a last resort, Watson. Use it only if our lives are in imminent danger." I agreed, though the memory of Roylett's towering figure and blazing eyes made me question the wisdom of facing him unarmed. Holmes, sensing my unease, clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Courage, my friend," said he. "We have faced danger before, and your steady hand has never failed me. Tonight, we shall need it more than ever." We returned to the inn to await Miss Stoner's signal, passing the time in silence, each lost in our thoughts. Holmes sat by the window, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air, his gaze fixed on some distant point. I, too, was preoccupied, my mind turning over the strange details of the case, the whistle, the speckled band, the ventilator's ominous purpose. The more I considered them, the more convinced I became that we were on the brink of uncovering a horror unlike any we had faced. At 11:30, a faint light flickered in the distance, the signal from Miss Stoner's window. Holmes sprang to his feet, his energy galvanizing. "The hour is upon us," said he, seizing his hat and cane. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot." We slipped out of the inn, moving swiftly through the darkened fields, the grass damp beneath our boots. The manor loomed ahead, its silhouette a jagged scar against the starry sky. The air was still, the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant rustle of leaves. As we approached the side entrance, I caught a glimpse of movement in the undergrowth, a fleeting shadow that might have been the cheetah or baboon, though it vanished before I could be certain. Mrs. Armitage was waiting, her face a mask of fear in the moonlight. "He's in his room," she whispered, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. "But he's restless, sirs. I heard him pacing not 10 minutes ago." Holmes nodded, his voice low. "You have our thanks, Mrs. Armitage. Now, return to your quarters and remain there. We shall handle the rest." She retreated, and we entered the manor, the door closing softly behind us. The corridors were as oppressive as ever, the air thick with the scent of decay. Holmes moved with the stealth of a cat, his steps silent on the creaking floorboards, and I followed, my revolver gripped tightly in my hand. We reached Miss Stoner's room without incident, and Holmes closed the door, plunging us into darkness. "Take your position, Watson," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stationed myself by the door, my back against the wall, while Holmes moved to the ventilator, his figure a faint outline in the gloom. The room was silent, the bolted bed and dummy bell rope looming like specters in the darkness. My heart pounded, the tension almost unbearable. But Holmes' calm presence steadied me. We waited, the minutes stretching into eternity, every creak of the house setting my nerves on edge. At last, a faint sound reached my ears, not the whistle, but a low, rhythmic tapping, as if something were moving in the adjacent room. Holmes' hand closed on my arm, a silent signal to remain still. The tapping ceased, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Then, from the direction of Roylett's room, came a new sound, a soft, deliberate creak, as of a door being opened with care. Holmes' grip tightened, and I felt the weight of the moment, the certainty that we were on the verge of confronting the heart of this deadly mystery. Whatever Roylett had planned, whatever the Speckled band might be, we were about to face it, and I knew that the hours ahead would test our courage and cunning to their limits. Chapter 6. The Night Vigiler. Darkness of Miss Helen Stoner's room at Stoke Moran enveloped us like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and I settled into our vigil on that fateful April night in 1883, the oppressive silence of the manor, broken only by the occasional creak of ancient timbers, seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. My heart beat heavily. The weight of our encounter with Dr. Grimesby Roylett, and the sinister clues we had uncovered, the fixed bed, the dummy bell rope, the oversized ventilator pressing upon me with an almost tangible force. Holmes, stationed near the ventilator, was a shadow in the gloom, his presence a steady anchor amidst the gathering tension. I stood by the door, my revolver gripped tightly, my senses strained for any sign of the danger we anticipated. The faint creak from Roylett's room, heard moments before, had ceased, leaving an eerie stillness that seemed to mock our vigilance. Holmes' hand rested lightly on my arm, a silent command to remain motionless. His eyes, glinting faintly in the darkness, were fixed on the ventilator, as if he could will the mystery to reveal itself through sheer force of intellect. The air was heavy with the musty scent of decay, and the distant roar of the cheetah, prowling somewhere in the grounds, sent a shiver through me. Yet Holmes remained, unmoved, his calm a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity of suspense. My limbs grew stiff, my eyes aching from the strain of peering into the darkness. I began to wonder if our vigil would yield nothing, if Roylett's agitation had been a mere outburst rather than a prelude to action. But Holmes' unwavering focus kept me alert, his certainty that the night held the key to the mystery sustaining my resolve. It was nearing 3 in the morning, the hour when Miss Stoner had reported hearing the mysterious whistle, when a new sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, a low, clear note, like the hiss of steam escaping a kettle, rising from the direction of the ventilator. My breath caught, and Holmes' grip tightened, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "Do you hear it, Watson?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The whistle mark it well." I nodded, though he could not see me, the sound chilling me with its eerie precision. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds, then ceased, only to resume a moment later, as deliberate as a signal. My mind raced to the words of Julia Stoner, gasped in her final moments, the Speckled band. Was this whistle the harbinger of that fatal agency, the instrument of Roylett's deadly design? I tightened my grip on my revolver, ready for whatever might follow. The whistle faded, and a new sound emerged, a soft, slithering rustle, as if something were moving through the ventilator. Holmes' hand shot up, signaling absolute silence, and I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it might betray us. The rustle grew closer, accompanied by a faint, metallic clink, like the tap of something hard against the stone. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes locked on the ventilator, his body poised for action. "Light, Watson," he whispered urgently. Now, I fumbled for the matches in my pocket, striking one against the box. The sudden flare cast a flickering glow across the room, illuminating the bed, the bell rope, and the dark mouth of the ventilator. And there, descending the bell rope with a sinuous grace that froze my blood, was a serpent, its scales glinting in the matchlight, its head swaying as it moved. Its body was mottled, a pattern of dark and light that seemed to shimmer, and its eyes, small and malevolent, fixed upon the bed below. Holmes sprang to his feet, seizing his cane from where it rested against the wall. With a swift, precise strike, he lashed out at the creature, the cane whistling through the air. The serpent hissed, its head rearing back, and in an instant it recoiled, slithering back up the bell rope and vanishing into the ventilator with a speed that defied belief. The metallic clink sounded again, fainter now, as if the creature had retreated to Roylett's room. "Quickly, Watson," Holmes cried, already moving toward the door. "To Roylett's chamber, there is no time to lose." I followed, my revolver in one hand, the dying match in the other, its light casting wild shadows as we raced through the corridor. The manor was a maze of darkness, but Holmes navigated it with unerring certainty, his steps swift and silent. We reached the door to Roylett's room, a heavy oak panel that stood slightly ajar, a faint glow of lamplight spilling from within. Holmes paused, his hand raised to signal caution, then pushed the door open, revealing a scene that would haunt me for years to come. Dr. Grimsby Roylett sat in a high-backed chair, his massive frame rigid, his face frozen in a grimace of terror. His eyes, wide and staring, were fixed on the ceiling, and around his forehead was coiled the serpent, its mottled body tight against his skin, its fangs buried deep in his flesh. The speckled band was no mere phrase, but a living nightmare. A swamp adder, its venom among the deadliest known. Roylett's hands were clenched, his body unmoving, the life already drained from him by the creature he had sought to wield as a weapon. Holmes approached cautiously, his cane raised, but the serpent, sensing our presence, hissed and began to uncoil. With a deft movement, Holmes struck again, dislodging the creature, which fell to the floor with a soft thud. Before it could strike, he seized a metal box from a nearby table, evidently Roylett's own device for handling the snake hand scooped. The adder inside, slamming the lid shut. The serpent's hisses echoed within, but it was secure, its deadly work done. I stood frozen, the match burning my fingers until it guttered out, plunging us back into near darkness. Holmes lit the lamp on Roylett's desk, its light revealing the full horror of the scene. The room was a chaos of medical texts, exotic artifacts, and strange instruments, a testament to Roylett's twisted intellect. A small cage, hidden behind a curtain, stood empty. Its door open, the source of the serpent's passage through the ventilator. Holmes turned to me, his face grave but composed. "The instrument of his crime has become his executioner," said he. "Roylett trained this creature to traverse the ventilator and descend the bell rope, using the whistle as a signal to recall it after its deadly work. Julia Stoner fell, victim to its venom, and tonight our presence disrupted his plan." The adder, confused or enraged, turned upon its master. I shuddered, the image of the serpent's glittering scales seared into my mind. "A diabolical scheme," I said, my voice hoarse. "To use such a creature, and with such precision, it is almost beyond belief." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning. The room Roylett's time in India gave him knowledge of such creatures, and his greed drove him to perfect this method. The ventilator was his conduit, the bell rope his guide, the fixed bed his trap, but his arrogance was his undoing. "Come, Watson, we must summon the authorities and ensure Miss Stoner's safety." We left the room, the weight of the discovery heavy upon us, and made our way to the side entrance, where we signaled Mrs. Armitage, the housekeeper. Pale and trembling, gasped at the news of Roylett's fate, but promised to guard the house until the police arrived. Holmes and I returned to the Crown in the night air, cold against our faces. The stars above a stark contrast to the horror we had witnessed. Miss Stoner, awaiting us in the parlour, rose as we entered, her eyes searching our faces. Holmes recounted the events with his usual clarity, sparing her the most gruesome details, but revealing the truth of her sister's death and Roylett's demise. She listened in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks, her relief mingled with sorrow. "You are safe now, Miss Stoner," Holmes said gently. "The danger is past, and you may return to your life unshadowed by fear." She clasped his hand, her voice choked with emotion. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. You have saved me from a fate I could not have faced alone." As we left her to rest, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, casting a pale glow over the fields. The vigil had been harrowing, but it had unveiled the truth, and though the memory of that night would linger, I knew that Holmes' relentless pursuit of justice had prevailed once more. Chapter 7. The Speckled Band revealed, the grim tableau in Dr. Grimsby Roylett's chamber at Stoke Moran, revealed in the flickering lamplight of that April night in 1883, remained etched in my memory as Sherlock Holmes and I stood over the lifeless form of the man who had orchestrated such a sinister design. The swamp adder, its mottled coils now confined within the metal box Holmes had secured, had delivered its fatal justice to its master, turning the instrument of murder into the agent of his own demise. The air in the room was thick with the musty scent of old books and exotic relics, and the silence that followed the serpent's hissing retreat was heavy with the weight of what we had uncovered. Holmes, his face grave but composed, surveyed the scene with the detached precision of one accustomed to confronting the darkest corners of human ingenuity. "Watson," said he, his voice low and steady, "we have witnessed the unraveling of a plot as cunning as it is diabolical. Roylott's scheme was a masterpiece of malevolence, but his arrogance has undone him. Let us examine this room further, for there may yet be clues to confirm the full scope of his design." I nodded, still shaken by the sight of the adder and the grotesque rigidity of Roylott's corpse. The lamp's light cast long shadows across the cluttered study, revealing shelves lined with medical tomes, jars of preserved specimens, and strange artifacts from Roylott's years in India. A heavy desk stood against one wall, its surface strewn with papers and instruments, and behind a tattered curtain, the small cage from which the serpent had emerged stood open, its bars glinting faintly in the gloom. Holmes moved to the desk, his fingers deftly sorting through the papers. "Here," he said, holding up a small notebook, its pages filled with cramped, meticulous handwriting. Roylott's notes on the swamp adder, its habits, its venom, and, most crucially, its training. "See here, Watson," he details a method of conditioning the creature to respond to a whistle, using it to traverse the ventilator and return at his command. I peered over his shoulder, my medical curiosity piqued despite the horror of the moment. The notes described the adder's venom as swift and undetectable, causing death within minutes through paralysis and cardiac failure. Roylott had evidently spent years studying the creature, exploiting its deadly nature to serve his greed. "He must have acquired it in India," I said, my voice hoarse. "To think of using such a creature against his own stepdaughters, it is monstrous." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the notebook. Monstrous, yet methodical. The ventilator was cut to allow the adder's passage, the bell rope positioned to guide it to the bed, which was bolted to ensure the victim remained in its path. The whistle was his signal, both to send the creature forth and to recall it before it could be discovered. Julia Stoner fell to its venom, and Helen was to be next, had we not intervened. He set the notebook down and turned to the ventilator, examining its edges with his magnifying glass. "Observe," said he, "the scratches along the inner rim, faint, but unmistakable. The adder's scales have left their mark, confirming its frequent passage." Roylott's plan was nearly flawless, leaving no trace save the cryptic words of a dying woman. I shuddered, the image of the serpent's descent vivid in my mind, and tonight, I asked, what caused it to turn on him? Holmes' lips curved into a grim smile. "Our presence, Watson." The adder, trained to respond to the whistle, was sent through the ventilator as before. But our vigilance saw, perhaps the light of your match disrupted its path. Confused or angered, it retreated, and Roylott, unprepared for its return, fell, victim to his own weapon. A fitting end, though a tragic one. We moved to the cage, its door ajar, and Holmes pointed to a small wooden box within, its lid perforated with tiny holes. "This is how he transported the creature," said he. "A portable lair, easily concealed. He likely kept it hidden here, releasing it only when needed." The metallic clink we heard was the box being opened or closed, a detail he overlooked. In his confidence, The room yielded further evidence. A whistle, carved from bone, lay among the papers, its design simple yet precise, capable of producing the low, clear note we had heard. A vial of milky liquid, labeled as an antidote, stood on a shelf, though Holmes dismissed it with a shake of his head. Too late for Roylott, he said, and likely ineffective against such venom. His knowledge was deep, but his hubris deeper. With the evidence gathered, Holmes turned to me, his expression resolute. We must summon the authorities, Watson, though we shall present this as an accident. The truth, while clear to us, would raise questions we cannot answer without exposing Miss Stoner to undue scrutiny. Let the coroner call it misadventure. Death by his own pet will suffice. I agreed, though the thought of concealing the full horror sat uneasily with me. And Miss Stoner, I asked. She must be told, but how much? Enough to free her from fear, said Eliminated. Holmes, but not so much as to distress her unduly. We shall return to the Crown Inn and inform her of her safety. Come, Watson, let us leave this place of death. We secured the metal box containing the adder, ensuring it posed no further threat, and left the study, closing the door on Roylott's grim fate. The corridors of Stoke Moran were as oppressive as ever, the air heavy with the weight of its secrets, but the knowledge that the danger had passed lent a lightness to our steps. We found Mrs. Armitage in the kitchen, her face pale with worry, and Holmes instructed her to send for the local constable, assuring her that the matter was resolved and Miss Stoner safe. The journey back to the Crown Inn was swift, the night air sharp and cleansing after the stifling gloom of the manor. Miss Stoner awaited us, her eyes searching ours for news, and Holmes recounted the events with his usual clarity, softening the horror of Roylott's end, while emphasizing her freedom from his tyranny. The speckled band was a swamp adder, he explained, trained by your stepfather to kill without trace. Julia's death was his doing, but tonight the creature turned upon him. You are safe, Miss Stoner, and may live without fear. Her tears were of relief, her hands clasping ours in gratitude. I owe you my life, she said, her voice trembling. How can I ever repay you? Live well, Holmes replied simply. That is payment enough. As we left the inn to summon the authorities, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, a promise of renewal after the darkness of the night. The speckled band had been revealed, its deadly purpose thwarted, and though the memory of that sinister serpent would linger, the knowledge that justice had prevailed in its own grim way brought a measure of peace to my heart. Chapter 8. The unravelling of the plot. The first light of dawn crept over the Surrey hills as Sherlock Holmes and I stepped out of the Crown Inn, leaving Miss Helen Stoner to the care of the innkeeper, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. After the harrowing events of the night, the air was sharp with the promise of a new day. Yet the grim memory of Dr. Grimsby Roylott's lifeless form, entwined by the deadly swamp adder, lingered in my mind like a shadow that refused to fade. The manor of Stoke Moran, with its decaying walls and sinister secrets, stood behind us, a mute witness to the tragedy we had uncovered. Holmes, striding beside me with his characteristic vigor, seemed untouched by the fatigue that weighed upon me, his mind still alight with the clarity that came from solving a puzzle as intricate as it was malevolent. Watson, said he, as we made our way toward the village to summon the local constable, this affair has been a study in contrasts, cunning in its conception, yet undone by its own precision. Roylott's plan was near flawless, yet it was his reliance on the adder's obedience that proved his downfall. There is a lesson here in the perils of overconfidence. I nodded, my thoughts still tangled in the horror of the night. It is a monstrous thing, I said, to train a creature to such a purpose. To think that he used his medical knowledge to kill, and in so silent a manner, is almost beyond comprehension. Holmes' eyes gleamed with a flicker of grim satisfaction. And yet, it is precisely that silence which betrayed him, he replied. The absence of marks, the cryptic words of Julia Stoner, the peculiarities of the room all pointed to a method that could only be the work of a mind both learned and depraved. Come, let us ensure the authorities are informed, and then we shall return to Miss Stoner to lay the matter to rest. We reached the village, a cluster of modest cottages stirring to life under the morning sun, and located the constable's house. The officer, a stout man named Hargreave, listened with growing astonishment as Holmes recounted a carefully edited version of events, describing Roylett's death as an accident caused by his own exotic pet. The truth, with its tale of deliberate murder and a trained serpent, would have strained credulity and exposed Miss Stoner to unwanted scrutiny. Hargreave, though skeptical of the manor's reputation, agreed to investigate, promising to secure the scene and summon the coroner. With the formalities underway, we returned to the Crown Inn, where Miss Stoner awaited us in the private parlour. Her composure had steadied, though her eyes still bore the weight of her ordeal. Holmes, seating himself opposite her, spoke with a gentleness that belied the intensity of his earlier focus. Miss Stoner, said he, the danger is past, and the truth of your sister's death is now clear. Allow me to explain the mechanism of Dr. Roylett's crime, so that you may understand and be free of fear. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly, and Holmes began, his voice clear and precise. Your stepfather, driven by the desire to retain control of your mother's fortune, devised a method to eliminate any threat to his wealth. The terms of the will, as you know, granted him the income until you and your sister married, at which point your shares would be released. Julia's engagement posed the first challenge, and he resolved it with a plan as ingenious as it was cruel. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with a steady reassurance. The room you now occupy, once your sister's, was the stage for his scheme. The bed bolted to the floor ensured the occupant remained in a precise position. The bell rope, a dummy, with no function, served as a guide. The ventilator, cut larger than necessary, was the passage through which he sent his instrument of death, a swamp adder, one of the most venomous snakes known, acquired during his years in India. He trained it to respond to a low whistle, sending it through the ventilator to descend the bell rope and bite its victim, whose death would appear natural, leaving no trace. The whistle you heard was his signal to recall the creature once its work was done. Miss Stoner's face paled, her breath catching as the full horror of the plan unfolded. And Julia, she whispered, she died by this creature. Holmes nodded gravely. Her final words, the speckled band, were a description of the adder's mottled coils, glimpsed in her terror as the venom took hold. The coroner's inquest, finding no marks, could not fathom the cause, but it was the adder's bite that killed her. Your move to her room, prompted by Roylett's feigned need for repairs, was his attempt to repeat the crime, your engagement having renewed. His motive? I watched Miss Stoner's expression shift from shock to a dawning realization, her fear giving way to a quiet resolve. And last night, she asked, how did he come to die? Holmes leaned forward, his tone measured but firm. Our presence in your room disrupted his plan. When I struck the adder, it retreated through the ventilator, returning to Roylett's chamber, Whether through panic or miscalculation, he failed to secure it, and the creature, perhaps enraged, turned upon him. His death was swift, the venom acting as it had on your sister. In a sense, justice was served by the very means he sought to employ. Miss Stoner covered her face with her hands, a sob escaping her lips. "To think he planned such a thing," she said, her voice muffled. "And yet, I pity him for all his cruelty. He was a broken man, consumed by his own greed." Holmes' expression softened, though his voice remained steady. "Pity is not misplaced, but neither is justice. You are free now, Miss Stoner, too. Live without the shadow of his malice. The manor is yours, should you choose to keep it, and your future is unclouded." She looked up, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I owe you everything," she said. "You and Dr. Watson have saved me from a fate I could not have escaped alone. I shall leave Stoke Maronit's memories are too heavy. My fiancé awaits me in Harrow, and we shall build a new life far from this place." Holmes rose, his manner brisk but kind. "A wise choice," said he. "We shall remain until the authorities have concluded their work to ensure all is settled. Rest now, and let the innkeeper tend to your needs." We left her to compose herself, stepping out into the morning light to meet the constable, who had arrived with a small retinue from the village. Holmes guided them to Roylett's study, where the body remained, the metal box containing the adder, placed safely in a corner. Hargreave, examining the scene, shook his head in disbelief. "A queer business," he muttered. "I've heard tales of Roylett's beasts, but a snake like this? It's the devil's own work." Holmes offered a concise explanation, framing the incident as an accident born of Roylett's reckless keeping of dangerous animals. The notebook, whistle, and cage were presented as evidence of his experiments, though Holmes withheld the full extent of the murder plot, knowing it would complicate matters without serving justice. The coroner, summoned shortly after, agreed to an inquest, and Holmes provided a statement that satisfied their inquiries while shielding Miss Stoner from undue attention. As we prepared to depart, the manor stood silent, its grim secrets laid bare. The cheetah's distant roar echoed faintly, a reminder of the wildness Roylett had cultivated, but it no longer held the same terror. We returned to the Crown in one final time, ensuring Miss Stoner was prepared to travel to Harrow, where her fiancé would meet her. Her gratitude was heartfelt, and as we parted, I saw in her eyes a spark of hope that had been absent before. The train back to London was a quiet affair, the rolling fields of Surrey giving way to the familiar sprawl of the city. Holmes sat in silence, his pipe unlit, his thoughts turned inward. I, too, was reflective. The unravelling of Roylett's plot, a testament to the depths of human avarice and the power of Holmes' relentless logic. The Speckled band, once a cryptic terror, had been revealed as a tool of murder, and though the cost had been great, the truth had set Miss Stoner free as we stepped onto the platform at Waterloo. The bustle of London enveloped us, a stark contrast to the desolation of Stoke Moran. "Another case closed, Watson," Holmes said, a faint smile touching his lips, and a reminder that even the most cunning schemes cannot withstand the light of scrutiny. I agreed, my heart lighter for the knowledge that justice, however grim, had prevailed. The adventure of the Speckled band would remain among the most singular of our shared experiences, a tale of darkness pierced by the clarity of reason. Chapter 9. Reflections in Baker Street. The familiar warmth of our Baker Street rooms enveloped us as Sherlock Holmes and I returned from the grim affair at Stoke Moran. The morning light of that April day in 1883, streaming through the windows to dispel the shadows of the previous night's horrors. The bustle of London, with its clatter of cabs and cries of street vendors, seemed a world apart from the desolate manner and the sinister machinations of Dr. Grimesby Roylott. I sank into my accustomed chair by the fire, the weight of our adventure settling upon me, while Holmes, with his characteristic restlessness, lit his pipe and began pacing the room, the curls of smoke trailing behind him, like a spectral echo of the mystery we had unravelled. The image of Roylott's lifeless form, entwined by the deadly swamp adder, lingered in my mind, as did the relief in Miss Helen Stoner's eyes when we assured her of her safety. The case, with its blend of cunning and cruelty, had been among the most singular we had faced, and I found myself eager to hear Holmes' reflections on the matter. "Holmes," I ventured, as he paused by the window to gaze out at the busy street below, "how did you piece it together so swiftly? The speckled band, the whistle, how did you divine their meaning from such cryptic clues?" Holmes turned, his sharp features softened by a faint smile, though his eyes retained their piercing clarity. "It was a matter of observation and elimination, Watson," said he, settling into his chair and tapping the ash from his pipe. "The facts, as always, were our guide. Let me take you through the chain of reasoning, for it is simplicity itself when one sees the pattern." He leaned back, his fingers steepled before him, and began in that measured tone that marked his most lucid explanations. Miss Stoner's narrative provided the first threads. Her sister's death, sudden and unexplained, with no marks of violence, suggested a method both subtle and precise. The phrase, "the speckled band," gasped in her final moments, was no mere delirium but a description of something tangible, something seen in her terror. This, combined with the low whistle heard at night, pointed to a controlled agency, one that operated in darkness and left no trace. I nodded, recalling the dread in Miss Stoner's voice as she recounted her tale. "But the room itself," I said, "the bed, the bell rope, how did they fit?" Holmes' eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. "The room was the stage, Watson, and its features the props of Roylott's deadly drama. The bed, bolted to the floor, ensured the victim remained in a fixed position, vulnerable to whatever descended. The bell rope, a dummy with no function, was a guide, strategically placed to direct the agency of death. The ventilator, oversized and connecting directly to Roylott's chamber, was the conduit of passage, not for air, but for something living. These elements, taken together, suggested a mechanism designed to deliver a fatal agent without detection. I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. "And the adder? How did you suspect a snake, of all things?" Holmes drew deeply on his pipe, the smoke curling upward as he spoke. Roylott's history was the key. His years in India, where he practiced medicine and encountered exotic fauna, gave him access to creatures unknown in England. The presence of a cheetah and baboon on the estate confirmed his penchant for the unusual, and the swamp adder, with its deadly venom and distinctive markings, fit the description of a speckled band. The whistle, a sound Miss Stoner noted as precise and deliberate, suggested a trained response, a behavior Roylott could have conditioned during his time. Abroad, the scratches in the ventilator, observed during our inspection, confirmed the passage of a scaled creature. From there, the conclusion was inevitable. I marveled at the clarity of his logic, though the horror of the scheme still chilled me. "It is almost diabolical," I said, "to conceive such a plan, and to execute it with such precision. yet his own creation turned against him. Holmes nodded, his expression tinged with a grim satisfaction. That is the irony, Watson. Roylett's confidence in his control over the adder was his undoing. Our presence, and perhaps the light of your match, disrupted the creature's routine, causing it to retreat and strike its master. In his arrogance, he failed to anticipate such a reversal. It is a reminder that even the most cunning plans carry the seeds of their own destruction. I sat back, reflecting on the strange chain of events that had led us from Miss Stoner's desperate visit to the grim discovery in Roylett's study. And Miss Stoner, I asked, what will become of her now? Holmes' gaze softened, a rare flicker of sentiment crossing his features. She is free, Watson, to live without fear. The manor, with its dark memories, will likely be sold, and she will begin anew with her fiancé in Harrow. The fortune now hers by Chapter 9, reflections in Baker Street, the familiar warmth of our baker. Street rooms enveloped us as Sherlock Holmes and I returned from the grim affair at Stoke Moran. The morning light of that April day in 1883, streaming through the windows to dispel the shadows of the previous night's horrors. The bustle of London, with its clatter of cabs and cries of street vendors, seemed a world apart from the desolate manor and the sinister machinations of Dr. Grimesby Roylett. I sank into my accustomed chair by the fire, the weight of our adventure settling upon me, while Holmes, with his characteristic restlessness, lit his pipe and began pacing the room, the curls of smoke trailing behind him. Like a spectral echo of the mystery we had unraveled, the image of Roylett's lifeless form, entwined by the deadly swamp adder, lingered in my mind, as did the relief in Miss Helen Stoner's eyes when we assured her of her safety. The case, with its blend of cunning and cruelty, had been among the most singular we had faced, and I found myself eager to hear Holmes' reflections on the matter. Holmes, I ventured, as he paused by the window to gaze out at the busy street below, how did you piece it together so swiftly? The speckled band, the whistle, how did you divine their meaning from such cryptic clues? Holmes turned, his sharp features softened by a faint smile, though his eyes retained their piercing clarity. It was a matter of observation and elimination. Watson, said he, settling into his chair and tapping the ash from his pipe. The facts, as always, were our guide. Let me take you through the chain of reasoning, for it is simplicity itself when one sees the pattern. He leaned back, his fingers steepled before him, and began in that measured tone that marked his most lucid explanations. Miss Stoner's narrative provided the first threads. Her sister's death, sudden and unexplained, with no marks of violence, suggested a method both subtle and precise. The phrase, "the speckled band," gasped in her final moments, was no mere delirium but a description of something tangible, something seen in her terror. This, combined with the low whistle heard at night, pointed to a controlled agency, one that operated in darkness and left no trace. I nodded, recalling the dread in Miss Stoner's voice as she recounted her tale. But the room itself, I said, the bed, the bell rope, how did they fit? Holmes' eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The room was the stage, Watson, and its features the props of Roylett's deadly drama. The bed, bolted to the floor, ensured the victim remained in a fixed position, vulnerable to whatever descended. The bell rope, a dummy with no function, was a guide, strategically placed to direct the agency of death. The ventilator, oversized and connecting directly to Roylett's chamber, was the conduit of passage, not for air, but for something living. These elements, taken together, suggested a mechanism designed to deliver a fatal agent without detection. I leaned forward, My curiosity piqued. And the adder? How did you suspect a snake, of all things? Holmes drew deeply on his pipe, the smoke curling upward as he spoke. Roylett's history was the key. His years in India, where he practiced, will secure her future. Our work has given her that chance, and it is enough. He rose, crossing to the bookshelf to retrieve a volume on tropical reptiles, no doubt, to verify some detail of the adder's nature. I watched him, struck by the contrast between his relentless intellect and the quiet compassion he showed to those in need. The case of the speckled band had tested us both, not only in courage, but in the ability to confront a mind as twisted as Roylett's and emerge victorious. As Holmes leafed through the book, his pipe relit and sending fresh curls of smoke into the air, I took up my pen to begin recording the adventure, determined to preserve its details for posterity. The fire crackled, the familiar clutter of our room's papers strewn across the table. Holmes' chemical apparatus in the corner offering a comforting contrast to the desolation of Stoke Moran. Outside, the sounds of London continued, a ceaseless tide of life that seemed to underscore the triumph of reason over malice. Holmes glanced up, noting my scribbling with a wry smile. "Another tale for your chronicles, Watson?" he asked, his tone lightly teasing. "Indeed," I replied, "and one of the strangest. The speckled band will not soon be forgotten." He chuckled, returning to his book. "Write it as you will, but leave out the embellishments. The facts are strange enough, without adornment." I smiled, knowing that no embellishment could rival the truth of what we had faced. The adventure of the speckled band had been a journey into the heart of darkness, but Holmes' unerring logic had brought us through, and as I set pen to paper, I felt a quiet pride in the part I had played, however small, in bringing justice to the shadows of Stoke Moran. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The soft glow of gas lamps illuminated our baker street rooms as Sherlock Holmes and I settled in after our return from Surrey. The events at Stoke Moran still vivid in my mind like the afterimage of a lightning flash. It was the evening of April 8th, 1883, and the familiar clutter of our sitting room, the scattered papers, the chemical apparatus in the corner, the faint aroma of Holmes' pipe formed a comforting contrast to the grim desolation of that decaying manor. The case of the speckled band, with its sinister blend of cunning and cruelty, had left an indelible mark upon me, and though the danger had passed, the memory of Dr. Grimsby Roylett's twisted plot and its tragic resolution lingered like a chill in the bones. Holmes, seated by the fire with a newspaper in hand, seemed already to have turned his restless mind to other matters, his eyes scanning the columns with that quick, darting intensity that betrayed his insatiable curiosity. I, however, could not so easily dismiss the affair, and as I took up my pen to continue my record, I found myself reflecting on the aftermath of our adventure and the fate of those we had left behind. The coroner's inquest, held the day following our night vigil, had been a subdued affair, conducted in the village hall near Stoke Moran. Holmes had guided the proceedings with his usual tact, presenting the evidence in a manner that satisfied the authorities while shielding Miss Helen Stoner from undue scrutiny. The swamp adder, secured in its metal box, was exhibited as the cause of Roylett's death, its deadly nature confirmed by a local zoologist summoned for the occasion. The notebook detailing Roylett's training of the creature, along with the whistle and empty cage, were offered as proof of his reckless experiments with exotic animals. The coroner, a pragmatic man named Mr. Haverford, accepted Holmes' account of an accidental death, ruling that Roylett had fallen victim to his own dangerous pet. The verdict of misadventure was recorded, and the matter was closed without further inquiry into the darker truth of his murderous intent. Miss Stoner spared. The ordeal of testifying had remained at the Crown Inn, where her fiancé, Mr. Percy Armitage, joined her from Harrow. His arrival had been a balm to her shaken spirits, and I could still recall the quiet strength in his manner as he clasped her hand, promising to take her far from the shadows of Stoke Moran. Holmes and I had met with them briefly before our departure, and Miss Stoner's gratitude was heartfelt, her eyes bright with tears as she spoke of her newfound freedom. "I shall never return to that place," she had said, her voice firm despite its tremor. "It is a house of sorrow, and I wish only to leave it behind." She had resolved to sell the manor, its decaying halls and haunted grounds holding nothing but memories of fear and loss. The fortune left by her mother, now fully hers with Roylett's death, would provide for her future, and she spoke of plans to settle in London, where she and Armitage could begin their married life unburdened by the past. Holmes, ever reserved in matters of sentiment, had offered a few words of encouragement, assuring her that the sale of the estate would be straightforward and that she need fear no further interference. As we parted, I saw in her face a spark of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of such darkness. The exotic animals, the cheetah and baboon that had roamed the grounds of Stoke Moran, were another matter settled. In the aftermath, the local magistrate, acting on the coroner's recommendation, ordered their removal, and a representative from the London Zoological Gardens was dispatched to capture and relocate them. The task was not without difficulty, for the creatures, freed from Roylett's control, had grown wilder, their roars and screeches echoing through the village for days. Yet by the week's end, they were safely housed in the zoo, where they became objects of curiosity rather than terror, their connection to the tragedy at Stoke Moran fading into local lore. Back in Baker Street, as I set these thoughts to paper, I glanced at Holmes, who had discarded the newspaper and was now leafing through a volume on Indian reptiles, no doubt seeking further insight into the swamp adder's habits. His ability to move from one case to the next, his mind ever hungry for new challenges, was a marvel to me, yet I could not help but press him for one final reflection. "Holmes," I said, laying down my pen, "this case has been among the most extraordinary we have faced. The ingenuity of Roylett's scheme, the horror of its execution due. You ever find yourself shaken by such things?" Holmes closed the book, his sharp eyes meeting mine with a mixture of amusement and gravity. "Shaken, Watson? No. The human capacity for evil is a constant, as is the capacity for reason to counter it. Roylett's plot was a masterpiece of malice, but it was also a puzzle, and puzzles yield to scrutiny. What moves me, if anything, is the courage of those, like Miss Stoner, who face such darkness and yet endure." I nodded, struck by the rare glimpse of his philosophy. "And the adder," I said, "to think of such a creature being trained to kill it, is almost beyond belief." Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. "Not beyond belief, but beyond the ordinary." Roylett's knowledge of India's fauna, gained during his years in Calcutta, gave him the means, and his greed supplied the motive. The speckled band was no mere metaphor but a literal truth, its coils the instrument of his ambition. Yet in its precision lay its flaw. For a single disruption, our presence brought it to ruin. He rose, crossing to the mantelpiece to retrieve his pipe, the familiar ritual, a signal that his mind was already turning elsewhere. "Write your account, Watson," he said, lighting the pipe with a taper from the fire. "But let it serve as a cautionary tale, not a sensation. The world has horrors enough without embellishment. I smiled, accustomed to his disdain for my literary flourishes, yet determined to capture the essence of the adventure. The case of the Speckled Band had been a journey into the heart of malevolence, its resolution a triumph of intellect over cruelty. As I resumed my writing, the fire crackling softly and the distant sounds of London filtering through the window, I felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that our efforts had freed Miss Stoner from a nightmare and brought a measure of justice to the memory of her sister. Holmes, now wreathed in smoke, glanced at me with a twinkle in his eye. "Another chapter for your chronicles, I presume?" he asked, his tone lightly mocking. "Indeed," I replied, "and one that will stand among the strangest. The Speckled Band is a tale few will believe, yet none will forget." He chuckled, returning to his book, and I bent to my task, the words flowing as I recounted the final threads of our adventure. The aftermath of Stoke Moran was a testament to Holmes' relentless pursuit of truth, and though the case was closed, its echoes would linger in my heart, a reminder of the thin line between cunning and catastrophe, and the power of reason to hold it at bay. The end.